They found her recording 3 months after the ship died, still transmitting into the void, and what she described in those final hours made the Inquisition seal the entire sector for 1,000 years. The salvage hauler Profiteer's Grace had been working the Ghoul stars for 6 months when their auger arrays picked up the signal, a ghost transmission, cycling endlessly through frequencies that shouldn't exist anymore, broadcasting on Imperial channels that had been retired before the second founding. Captain Yellen Court almost dismissed it as stellar radiation playing tricks with their sensors. Almost. But something in the signal's pattern made her spine prickle with instinctive wrongness. A rhythm too deliberate to be natural, too desperate to ignore. They followed it for 3 days through the void's frozen darkness, their Geller field generators groaning at the edge of burnout as they navigated between stellar graveyards and radiation storms that had names in no Imperial catalogue. When they finally found the source, Court understood why this region earned its name. The ship hung dead in space, a strike cruiser from a legion whose colors she couldn't quite place. The hull bore marks that might have been Lunar Wolves white, might have been Sons of Horus green. The colors had aged into something between both, as if the ship itself couldn't decide which heresy it belonged to. Fidelitas Lex, the registry transponder whispered through 10 millennia of static. That's impossible, her navigator breathed beside her. That class of vessel hasn't existed since the heresy, Court finished. She checked the chronometer readings again. 10,000 years. The ship had been dead and drifting for 10,000 years. But when their boarding party cut through the sealed airlocks and stepped into corridors that should have been frozen crypts, they found something that defied every law of physics and entropy they knew. The corpses were still warm, not decomposed, not freeze-dried by vacuum exposure, not reduced to skeletal dust by millennia of cosmic radiation. Warm, as if they had died hours ago, not epochs. Captain, her lead salvager Drace, whispered over the vox. His voice carried the particular strain of someone whose sanity was being tested. You need to see this. She followed his marker through corridors that smelled wrong, not of decay, but of preservation, like a museum where time had simply stopped flowing. Emergency lumens flickered with power that shouldn't exist, fed by generators that should have exhausted their fuel before humanity learned to write. They found her in what had once been a communications chamber. A woman slumped against a terminal that still glowed with faint amber light. Her Remembrancer robes were pristine, unmarked by the violence that had clearly consumed the ship. Blood painted the walls in patterns that suggested desperate last stands, but she sat untouched in the center of it all, as if she had been protected by something invisible. Her face was frozen in an expression that Court couldn't quite name. Not terror, though terror was there. Not grief, though grief haunted every line. Something worse. The look of someone who had seen a truth they couldn't know, and had died with that knowledge burning behind their eyes. In her hands, clutched against her chest with rigor that hadn't faded, was a data slate. Its screen still glowed. Throne, preserve us, Drace whispered. It's still recording. Court reached out with hands she couldn't quite keep steady. The data slate was warm to the touch, humming with activity, its memory cores processing and storing and transmitting as if no time had passed since this dead woman had activated it. The power cells should have died in days. They'd been functioning for 10,000 years. She lifted it carefully and the screen flickered into focus. Text scrolled past, interspersed with audio waveforms that pulsed with desperate regularity. A message, cycling on infinite repeat, broadcasting to a void that had stopped listening before the age of strife ended. Court's finger hovered over the playback control. Don't, her navigator said suddenly. Captain, the warp currents around this ship, they're wrong. We should destroy this and leave. But Court had survived 20 years in the salvage trade by being curious where others were cautious. She pressed play. Static washed through the chamber, and then a voice, a woman's voice, shaking with something far worse than fear. Wearing a human face like a mask, the voice said. The words were high Gothic, but the accent was ancient, from before the heresy standardized language across the Imperium. Not corrupted, not possessed, just designed. That's what I finally understood. They were wearing their humanity like a disguise, and underneath, the recording cut to static. Court reached to stop it, but her hand froze as the voice returned, clearer now, speaking from the beginning of some longer testament. My name is Mara Vendrus. I was, a Remembrancer assigned to the Lunar Wolves' 13th Company during the Great Crusade. If you're hearing this, then I'm dead. The ship is dead, and you need to know what I saw. You need to understand what we really were. Court should have stopped it there, should have followed protocol, sealed the recording, reported it to the nearest inquisitorial authority. But something in that dead woman's voice held her transfixed. I need to go back to the beginning, to when I still believed, to when I thought we were heroes. The recording shifted, and Mara Vendrus began to speak. I remember my excitement when they assigned me to the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet. 200 years into the Great Crusade, and humanity was reclaiming the stars. I was going to be part of that, going to document the glorious reunification of our scattered species, going to paint the triumph of enlightenment over the darkness of old night. I was 26 standard years old. I was an artist. I was an idiot. They gave me quarters aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the War Master's own flagship. Horus Lupercal himself welcomed the Remembrancers to his fleet, spoke to us of the importance of our mission. We weren't just historians, he told us. We were architects of culture. We would help humanity remember what it meant to be unified, to be great. His smile could have lit a sun. I believed every word. My first compliance action was designated Planet 6319. They didn't tell us its name. I learned later they'd stopped using names decades into the Crusade. Names implied individuality, uniqueness. The Imperium preferred numbers. Easier to file, easier to forget. The briefing was perfunctory. Human population, approximately 4 billion. Technology level, industrial, pre-void capability. Status, non-compliant. Mission objective, achieve compliance through negotiation, demonstration of force if necessary. If necessary. That phrase did a lot of work. I watched from the observation deck as we translated into the system. The planet hung in space like a blue-green jewel, city lights visible on the night side, orbital stations glinting in reflected starlight. A living world, thriving despite the isolation of old night. They should have been grateful to see us. That's what I thought, what we'd been taught. These lost fragments of humanity, cut off for 5,000 years, surely they would welcome reunion with their brothers. The fleet broadcast on every frequency, in every language our cogitators could translate. The message was simple. Humanity stands united under the Emperor of mankind. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. You have 72 hours to respond. I remember thinking how generous that was. 3 full days to make a decision that would shape their civilization's future. Their response came in 18 hours. Captain Gaviel Loken brought me the translation personally. He was Lunar Wolves through and through, earnest, honest, loyal to a fault. I liked him. He treated Remembrancers with respect, unlike some of the other Astartes who saw us as unnecessary baggage. "You should read this," he said, and something in his voice made my stomach tighten. The message was eloquent, respectful even. They acknowledged our claim to represent terror. They understood our desire for unity. But they had built a functioning society during Old Night, had survived and thrived, and they politely declined to submit to external authority. They actually asked with diplomatic courtesy, if we might simply leave them in peace. I looked up at Loken. That seems reasonable. Why not just... I stopped. His expression was pity, pure and complete. "It doesn't work that way," he said quietly. "Unity isn't a request. It's a requirement. But they're not our enemies. They're human. They've committed no crime." "Non-compliance is the crime," he interrupted. "The War Master's orders are absolute. Compliance or death. There is no third option." I watched the fleet move into bombardment formation, watched the gun decks power up, their plasma cores building to firing temperature, watched the planet rotate beneath us, oblivious, its population going about their lives with no idea what was coming. "This is insane," I whispered. "They're not a threat. They just want to be left alone." Loken turned to leave, paused at the hatchway. "That's exactly why they can't be left alone. An independent human civilization is proof that humanity doesn't need the Emperor. That's unacceptable." The bombardment began 6 hours later. I've tried to describe what orbital bombardment looks like to people who've never witnessed it. The scale defeats language. Cities folding into themselves like paper crushed in a fist. Firestorms visible from orbit, racing across continents faster than sound. Oceans boiling into steam clouds that blot out the sun. But I'm an artist. I see things differently. The colors were beautiful. That's the horror I can't escape. The planetary crust fracturing into molten rivers. That was crimson and gold and burning orange, like the sunsets I used to paint as a child. The atmosphere igniting from the thermal shock. Sheets of blue and violet fire dancing across the sky. The cities imploding. Towers of glass and steel catching the light as they fell, refracting the destruction into rainbow prisms. I painted it. Every moment of the 6-hour bombardment, I stood at that viewport and I painted. 4 billion people, 6 hours. I did the mathematics because my mind needed something to hold on to besides the screaming. 185,000 deaths every second. Every brushstroke on my canvas represented millions of lives ending. The War Master came to my quarters that evening. I didn't hear him enter. Primarchs move with a grace that defies their size. He stood behind me, silent, studying the painting still wet on its frame. "It's beautiful," Horus Lupercal said finally. I wanted to throw the painting at him, wanted to scream that beauty shouldn't exist in genocide. But when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight I couldn't pass. "The most terrible things often are. That's what makes them terrible." He left before I could respond. I stood there, brush in hand, and understood with crystalline clarity. This wasn't a war. Wars have two sides. This was erasure. Systematic, industrial, efficient erasure of anything that didn't fit the pattern. Compliance or death. Unity or annihilation. The crusade wasn't spreading civilization. It was erasing every other possibility of what civilization could be. They let me go surface side 3 days later to document the liberation. Liberation. That word still makes me want to vomit. The ash was still falling, soft, grey, constant. It settled on my rebreather mask, on my gloves, on the ruins that had once been cities. The air tasted of cooked meat, even through the filters. I tried not to think about what I was breathing. The lunar wolves had already begun construction, not rebuilding, building. New structures in Imperial Gothic style, all hard angles and aquila symbols, rising from foundations that still radiated heat from the bombardment. Cathedrals. They were building cathedrals. Why cathedrals? I asked one of the tech priests overseeing construction. I thought the crusade was secular. The imperial truth rejects religious belief. He looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. Architecture of compliance, he said. Structures that inspire awe and submission. The psychological effect is more efficient than garrisoning troops. But the cathedrals bothered me less than what I saw in the lunar wolves themselves. Some of them had started scarification. Ritual cuts on their armor, on their skin where it showed. Symbols that weren't imperial aquilas, weren't anything I recognized from approved iconography. When I asked about it, I got vague answers about warrior traditions and lodge brotherhoods. Lodges, warrior societies within the legions, operating parallel to the command structure. They met in sections of the ships that smelled wrong, not like incense. Incense I could have understood. Military ritual has always involved symbolism. This was something else. Copper and ozone and a sweetness that made my teeth ache. I tried to document a lodge meeting once. Just stood outside the sealed chamber with my recorder, capturing audio. Images of Astartes entering and leaving. Loken found me. Actually picked me up and carried me 3 decks away before setting me down. "You can't record that," he said. His face was pale, pupils dilated with something I'd never seen in him before. Fear. "Please, Mara, for your own sake, never try that again." "What are they doing in there?" "I don't know, but I've seen what happens to people who ask too many questions." He wouldn't elaborate, wouldn't meet my eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the lodge meetings, about the wrongness that leaked from those sealed chambers, about the way some of the Astartes looked at Remembrancers now, not with the bored tolerance they'd shown before, but with something calculating, predatory. I reviewed my recordings, trying to find patterns, trying to understand what was changing. And that's when I realized I had documented 66 compliance actions in 8 months. 66 worlds brought into imperial unity through negotiation or force. 66 civilizations that either submitted or died. I had never questioned it. Not really. I'd painted it, recorded it, archived it, and moved on to the next system. I was a collaborator. I had been making genocide beautiful. It was on the 67th compliance that I saw one of the Primarchs do something that couldn't be explained by military necessity, couldn't be justified by the dream of unity. And when I tried to report it, 3 Remembrancers who'd witnessed the same thing disappeared before morning. And I realized we weren't just documenting the crusade. We were its hostages. Chapter 2. The Perfect Machine. They called it Compliance Fleet 338, and by the time I was assigned to document its operations, it had sterilized 46 worlds in 18 months, and the Mechanicum adepts calculated it could improve efficiency by 30% if they removed unnecessary humanitarian delays. The transfer came without explanation. One day, I was aboard the Vengeful Spirit. The next, I was being shuttled to a fleet I'd never heard of, operating in a sector whose designation was just numbers and coordinates. No glory, no famous commanders, just industrial-scale compliance. The fleet master was Admiral Kiris Ven, a thin man with augmetic eyes that clicked when they refocused. He welcomed me aboard his flagship with the enthusiasm of someone receiving a furniture delivery. "You're the artist," he said. Not quite a question. "High Command wants documentation of operational efficiency improvements. You'll have full access to logistical data. Try not to get in the way." He didn't seem corrupted. Didn't seem evil. just tired with the particular exhaustion of someone who'd done the same thing too many times to question it anymore. I should have recognized that look. I'd been seeing it in mirrors. The briefing room smelled of recycled air and machine oil. Ven pulled up hololithic displays with the casual efficiency of a factory foreman reviewing production quotas. We've refined compliance operations into 3 categories, he explained, highlighting sectors on the strategic map: green, yellow, red, compliant worlds, immediate submission, minimal resource expenditure, resistant worlds, moderate force application, acceptable casualty ratios, terminal worlds, complete sterilization protocols. Terminal, I repeated. The word sat heavy in my mouth. Worlds where the population cost exceeds projected value contribution. He zoomed in on a red-marked planet. For example, 7712. Population 900 million. Primarily desert environment. Limited arable land. Our projections indicated they would require 400 years of food imports to achieve agricultural self-sufficiency. Meanwhile, the mineral deposits beneath the major population centers are worth approximately. So you killed them. We optimized resource allocation. His augmetic eyes clicked, focusing on me with mechanical precision. Mara, may I call you Mara? You seem disturbed. Perhaps you don't understand mathematics. He pulled up new charts. Columns of numbers, curves showing resource consumption versus production output. Probability matrices calculating long-term imperial value. A family of 5 on an agri-world, he said, tracing his finger down the calculations, will consume, on average, 847% more resources than they produce before retirement age. That's food, water, infrastructure maintenance, medical care, administrative overhead. The administratum has run these numbers across millions of sample populations. The math is unambiguous. I stared at the numbers. Somewhere in those equations, human lives had become negative integers. Therefore, Ven continued, on worlds where the population-to-resource ratio exceeds sustainable thresholds, liquidation becomes the logical solution. We're not being cruel. We're being efficient. Efficient, I echoed. The Emperor's vision is human unity across 1 million worlds. That requires unprecedented resource management. Every mouth that consumes without contributing delays the great work. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. I know how this sounds, but someone has to make the hard calculations. Someone has to ensure humanity's survival, even when survival requires difficult choices. The horror wasn't that he was lying. The horror was that he believed it. Completely. Genuinely believed that genocide could be justified with spreadsheets and logistical models. The Imperium doesn't need chaos to become monstrous, I whispered to myself later, alone in my quarters, staring at the data files he'd given me. The math alone is enough. I had watched Horus Lupercal find beauty in bombardment, but at least there was emotion there, however twisted. This was worse. This was systematic, clinical, utterly rational horror. Atrocity reduced to optimization algorithms. And the truly terrifying thing, it worked. Fleet 338's efficiency ratings were 64% higher than comparable expeditionary forces. They'd brought more worlds into compliance with fewer casualties among Imperial forces. By every metric that mattered to the administratum, they were succeeding. I documented it all. Every chart, every calculation, every perfectly logical justification for mass murder. Because that's what Remembrancers did. We made it beautiful. We made it make sense. But I hadn't told you yet what I saw on that 67th compliance. What I witnessed that made 3 other Remembrancers disappear. The planet was designated Calcinus Majoris. No numbers this time. They'd kept the name, probably because it had been a human colony during the dark age of technology, before Old Knight severed it from Terra. Population, 16 million. Technology, advanced. Unique characteristic, stable psyker population. That last detail made the fleet pause. Psykers were dangerous, everyone knew that. Windows to the warp, vulnerable to demonic possession, potential vectors for chaos corruption. The standard protocol was simple. Round them up, ship them to Terra for the black ships, or execute them if transport wasn't feasible. But Calcinus Majoris was different. They'd learned to control it. Somehow, during the isolation of Old Knight, they'd developed training regimens and psychological conditioning that allowed psykers to safely use their abilities without warp taint. No demonic possession, no chaos corruption, just humans with extraordinary abilities, integrated into a functioning society. It should have been studied, should have been lauded as a triumph of human achievement. The Imperium was always desperate for safe psykers. The Astronomicon alone consumed thousands of them yearly. Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Warriors, had other ideas. I watched from the observation deck of his flagship as he reviewed the planetary surveys. His face was perfectly still, mask-like, but his hands trembled slightly as they traced across the hololithic displays of Calcinus's cities. Their architecture was mathematically perfect, not in the obvious way, not simple geometric patterns or symmetrical layouts, complex, fractal geometries that optimized for efficiency, beauty, and psychological well-being simultaneously. Buildings that shouldn't be structurally possible but somehow stood, their weight distributions defying conventional physics through mathematics so advanced even the Mechanicum couldn't fully pass them. How did they achieve this? Perturabo asked the lead tech priest. His voice was soft, dangerous. Unknown, Lord Primarch. The mathematical principles appear to be unique developments, possibly influenced by their psyker population's intuitive understanding of higher dimensional spaces. Influenced by psykers. The words came out flat. So we couldn't replicate it. These achievements would die with them. Not necessarily, my lord. With proper study, we could potentially... No. Perturabo turned away from the display. If the Imperium cannot claim this knowledge, then no one can. Prepare bombardment protocols. Complete eradication. Nothing survives. I couldn't stop myself. Lord Primarch, they've offered immediate compliance. They want to join the Imperium. Why destroy them? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw what was behind those eyes. Not anger, not madness, pure, crystalline jealousy. The rage of a child who'd been given every toy, every advantage, every opportunity to excel, and then saw someone else create something beautiful that he couldn't. Because they achieved perfection, he said simply. And I did not. The bombardment lasted 19 hours, far longer than necessary for simple sterilization. He was being thorough, making absolutely certain that nothing survived, no records, no architectural fragments, no possibility that anyone would ever know that these people had achieved something the Imperium's greatest minds could not. I filmed it, all of it, including Perturabo standing in the ruins afterward, walking through the rubble of those impossible buildings, his face serene for the first time since I'd met him. He'd erased his shame from existence. If no one could prove that Calcinus Majoris had been greater than him, then it might as well never have been. The Primarchs weren't just weapons, I realized. They were broken gods, leading a crusade built on broken logic, destroying everything that exposed their flaws. I wasn't the only one noticing things. The cargo hold in Subdeck 9 had been abandoned for months, ever since a plasma leak scorched its contents. Perfect place for a meeting. We gathered in small groups, remembrancers from different fleets, trading observations in whispers while our recorders stayed powered down. Euphrates Keeler arrived last, as always. She had a gift for not being noticed, despite being one of the most talented imagists in the Crusade. She carried a data slate wrapped in lead foil. Basic, but it would fool passive Auspex sweeps. 3 more disappeared last week, someone said. I didn't know his name intentionally. Safer that way. Marcus, Sylvana, and Chen, all listed as reassigned. None of them logged onto any fleet manifests. They saw too much, Keeler said quietly. She unwrapped her data slate, brought up images. Like this. The first image showed a lunar wolf, but something was wrong with his eyes. They didn't reflect light correctly, absorbed it into depths that seemed to go back further than a human skull should allow. That's Squad Sergeant Grail, I breathed. I know him. Those eyes. I know. I've documented 47 cases across multiple legions. It's not consistent enough to be mutation, not dramatic enough to be obvious corruption. But it's there. More images. Word-bearers building shrines in hidden ship compartments, carved with symbols that made my vision blur when I looked at them too long. World-eaters, with fresh surgical scars at the base of their skulls, modifications that wouldn't be officially called butcher's nails for years yet, but served the same purpose. Emperor's children who'd started facial scarification, pursuing some ideal of perfection that made them look progressively less human. It's happening across the entire Crusade, Keeler said. Different expressions, but the same underlying pattern. The legions are changing. Being changed. By what? Someone asked. We've been swimming in the warp for 2 centuries, Keeler said. Every jump, every translation, every day spent traveling between stars through that place. The warp doesn't just corrupt, it infects. Gradually, subtly, and we're in it constantly, exposing ourselves to something that was never meant to touch real space. Then everyone should be affected, I said. Not just Astartes, but they are affected. She pulled up more images. Fleet crew with vacant expressions. Remembrancers who'd stopped questioning what they documented. Entire populations of newly compliant worlds developing sudden, fanatical loyalty to the Emperor. We're all being changed. The Astartes just show it more obviously because they're more psychologically resilient. The changes have to be more dramatic to affect them. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. We all froze. Someone's hand moved toward a weapon. Keeler's thumb hovered over her data slate's wipe function. The footsteps passed, continued down the corridor, faded. We exhaled together, but the fear didn't fade with the footsteps. This was our reality now. Meetings in abandoned compartments. Paranoia as survival strategy. The knowledge that asking questions could get you reassigned into non-existence. We have to document this, I said. For whoever comes after. So they know it didn't happen all at once. So they understand how we became what? I didn't have words for it yet. Didn't fully understand what the Crusade was creating. But I knew we were documenting our own transformation into something monstrous, and we were powerless to stop it. Keep recording, Keeler said. Hide copies. If they kill us, at least the truth survives. It was the best plan we had. It was no plan at all. The Imperial Iterator's speech drew 10,000 souls to the assembly deck. I went because attendance was mandatory for Remembrancers, expected to document these moments of cultural unification. Iterator Vox Kalen was a master of his craft. His voice filled the vast chamber without amplification, carrying that particular blend of warmth and authority that made you want to believe him. Brothers and sisters, he began, and the crowd leaned forward instinctively. We stand at the threshold of humanity's greatest achievement. For millennia, our species was scattered, divided, lost in darkness, but no longer. His words painted images more vivid than any of my paintings. He spoke of enlightenment, of reason triumphing over superstition, of science illuminating the dark corners of the galaxy, of hope spreading like dawn across 1,000,000 worlds. "We are not conquerors," he declared, his face radiant with conviction. "We are liberators. Wherever we go, we bring the light of knowledge, the gift of unity, the promise of a future where humanity stands united against the darkness." The crowd believed him. I could see it in their faces, feel it in the way they hung on his every word. Even the fleet crew who'd participated in a dozen bombardments, who'd watched cities burn and populations die, they believed him. And here was the horror. I wanted to believe him too. I'd seen what compliance really meant. I'd documented the genocides, the liquidations, the systematic erasure of human diversity. I'd watched Perturabo destroy perfection out of jealousy. I'd hidden in cargo holds with other remembrancers, sharing forbidden knowledge. But listening to Vox Callan speak, I felt the doubt creeping in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was focusing on the difficult necessities and missing the greater purpose. Maybe the ends really did justify the means. The lie was so beautifully constructed that it seduced even those who knew it was false. I looked around the assembly deck, saw the same expression on thousands of faces. Belief. Genuine, absolute belief that we were heroes bringing civilization to the stars. And I understood then what we really were. We weren't documenting history. We were creating mythology, building narratives that would justify actions that couldn't be justified through facts alone. Every speech, every painting, every recording was another brick in a cathedral of lies, and we were the architects. Language as weapon, narrative as anesthetic, art as accomplice to atrocity. I was complicit. We all were. And the worst part, we were good at it. On Femus, I watched an entire civilization choose death over compliance. Not because they were corrupted, not because they were cruel, but because they looked at what we offered and saw something worse than extinction. And as their world burned, I finally understood. We weren't the Imperium yet. We were still becoming it. And every burned world, every forced compliance, every choice between submission and annihilation was teaching humanity that there was no alternative to tyranny. And by the time someone tried to stop it, tried to say, "This is wrong," tried to rebel against what we'd become, it would already be too late. The Imperium would already be inevitable, and I was watching it be born. Chapter 3. The Cost of Perfection. There's a report, classified obsidian level by the Inquisition, that describes a legion losing its mind all at once. Not to chaos, not to corruption, but to the simple mathematical realization that they'd murdered their way across the galaxy for a dream that could never be real. I found that report by accident. Or perhaps it found me. Perhaps something wanted me to see it, to understand the full scope of what we were attempting. The data vault on the Vengeful Spirit was supposed to be restricted to command staff and senior Mechanicum personnel, but Remembrancers were given surprisingly broad access. How else could we document the Crusade's glory? They trusted us with their secrets because they believed we'd make those secrets beautiful. They weren't entirely wrong. The file was labeled Strategic Projection, Crusade Terminus Calculation, Eyes Only. I should have closed it immediately, should have logged out, reported the access breach, continued with my assigned documentation. Instead, I opened it. The Mechanicum doesn't deal in approximations. Every projection in that file was calculated to 17 decimal places, cross-referenced against millennia of historical conquest data, verified through probability matrices so complex they required specialized cogitators just to pass. Current crusade duration, 207 standard years. Current compliance rate, 2,847 worlds per year, trending downward as the crusade expanded and supply lines stretched. Estimated remaining non-compliant human worlds, 2.7 million. Estimated time to achieve full compliance at current rate, 2,000 years. 2,000 years. 2 entire millennia of continuous warfare, of compliance actions, of worlds burning, of populations choosing between submission and extinction. But that was just human worlds. Estimated Xeno civilizations requiring elimination, 48,000 plus. And that number included only the ones they'd catalogued. The galaxy was vast, and every new sector revealed species they'd never encountered. Empires that had thrived during humanity's isolation, civilizations that had claimed worlds humanity once held. All of them marked for extinction. Projected casualties, human populations only, not counting Xenos, 8 to 12 trillion. Trillion, with a T. I stared at that number until it stopped meaning anything. Tried to visualize it, couldn't. Tried to feel appropriate horror, felt only numbness. The scale defeated comprehension, but the Mechanicum understood scale. That's what they were for. I requested an interview with Magos Kalik Vrain, the adept responsible for compliance efficiency optimization. He received me in his workshop, surrounded by cogitators that hummed with constant calculation, their data streams scrolling across hololithic displays in languages I couldn't read. "Ah, the artist," he said. His voice was surprisingly warm, untouched by the typical monotone of heavily augmented tech priests. "You've seen the projections. Good. Transparency improves morale, I find. People work better when they understand the purpose." 12 trillion casualties, I said. "That's the purpose." No, he laughed, a strange, mechanical sound. "That's the cost. The purpose is unification. The casualties are simply necessary subtractions." He pulled up a new set of charts, gesture casual as if showing me vacation hollows. "We've actually improved significantly in recent years. Civilian casualty rates are down 34% from the Crusade's first century. Better targeting algorithms, more efficient compliance protocols. We're getting quite good at this. Getting good at killing people. Getting good at minimizing unnecessary deaths." He seemed genuinely confused by my tone. "Look here. This graph shows resource expenditure per compliance action. Notice the downward trend. We're achieving unity with progressively less waste. That's mercy, Mara. Mathematical mercy." He showed me projections for the Crusade's completion. By M35, assuming no major setbacks, they'd achieve 78% galactic compliance, a number they'd determined was functionally equivalent to total unification for purposes of imperial stability. "What about the other 22%? I asked. "Liquidated, naturally. Some populations are simply incompatible with imperial integration. Wrong psychology, wrong culture, wrong biology. The math is clear. Attempting to force compliance on certain populations costs more than those populations could ever contribute. So," he made a gesture like wiping a slate clean. "Liquidated." He didn't understand why I'd stopped breathing, didn't notice my hands shaking. Just continued explaining his projections with the enthusiasm of someone discussing crop rotation strategies. "The beautiful thing about this approach," he continued, "is its elegance. Every action serves multiple purposes. A compliance that requires orbital bombardment doesn't just achieve political unity, it also clears territory for more compliant populations, reduces resource competition, and provides object lessons for neighboring systems. Efficiency stacked upon efficiency." "You're describing genocide," I whispered. I'm describing optimization. He looked at me with something approaching pity. I understand this is difficult for artistic temperaments. You see individuals, stories, faces. I see numbers, probabilities, outcomes. But my perspective is the one that ensures humanity survives. Someone has to make the calculations. Someone has to determine acceptable losses. The horror wasn't in what he said. The horror was that he was right by his own logic. If the goal was universal compliance, if the alternative was chaos and disunity, if humanity's survival depended on absolute unity, then yes, the math worked. The numbers justified themselves. The Imperium doesn't need chaos to become monstrous. The math alone is enough. I found Iacton crews in the training halls, running combat drills with a dedication that bordered on desperation. He was old for a lunar wolf, 170 years of continuous service, one of the first generation, old enough that some of the younger Astartes called him half-heard, because they thought his opinions were outdated. He agreed to an interview. I think he was lonely. We sat in an observation room overlooking the practice cages, watching younger space marines tear through combat scenarios with machine efficiency. Cruz's face was weathered in ways that shouldn't be possible for Astartes biology. Not physical aging, but something else. Psychological erosion, worn into his features through sheer duration of experience. "What would you like to know?" he asked. His voice was steady, professional, the perfect soldier. "How many compliances have you participated in?" 3,417 primary actions. Twice that number in secondary operations. "How many people have you killed?" The question hung in the air. I watched his face, saw the moment the professional mask cracked. "How many?" he repeated softer. "How many what?" "How many people have you personally killed?" Over 170 years of compliance actions. His hands, massive even by Astartes standards, began to shake. Barely visible, but there. I don't know. I genuinely don't know." He stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "I remember the first 100. I remember their faces. The ones who fought, the ones who ran, the ones who just stood there, frozen. After that, it becomes noise, data. You stop seeing individuals and start seeing threat assessments, target priorities, kill zones. You have to, or you'd go insane." He looked up at me, and his eyes were drowning. "Except I think I went insane anyway. I just didn't notice." "What happened?" He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Recent compliance. Planet 4137, urban pacification. We were moving through a residential sector, clearing buildings. Standard procedure. Anyone who doesn't immediately surrender is considered hostile. And a child, maybe 8 standard years, came out from behind rubble, threw a rock at me. My auto senses translated what she shouted, 'Monster.' His hands weren't shaking anymore. They'd curled into fists so tight I heard his gauntlets creak. I killed her before I'd consciously registered the threat. Bolt around center mass. She disappeared. The training took over. I didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't even question whether an 8-year-old with a rock was a legitimate threat. "That's procedure," I said quietly. "Hostile action during compliance warrants lethal response. I know. I've enforced that protocol thousands of times. But this time, I stood there afterward, looking at where she'd been, and I couldn't remember why. Couldn't remember what we were liberating them from. Couldn't remember when compliance became extermination." He turned to face me fully, and I saw something I'd never seen in a space marine before. Not doubt, not regret, something worse. terror. Pure, absolute terror of what he'd become. "We were supposed to be humanity's protectors," he said. "The Emperor's finest. Angels of death, yes, but angels nonetheless. When did we become just death? How many do you think you've killed? Total estimate." He did the math in his head, augmented mind calculating probabilities and kill zone averages. Somewhere between 400,000 and 900,000 sentient beings. I can't be more precise. I stopped counting centuries ago. The number sat between us like a corpse. "I think I stopped being human somewhere around the 10,000th kill," Cruz said. "I just didn't notice until now. And the worst part, I'm one of the good ones. I still question. I still remember. Most of my brothers." He gestured at the training cages below, where Astartes practice killing with religious dedication. "They stopped asking why decades ago. What are you going to do?" "What can I do? I'm a weapon. Weapons don't choose their targets." He stood, towering over me. "But thank you for asking the question, for making me count. Someone should be counting." He left before I could respond. I watched him go, this broken angel, this killing machine with a soul that had worn through somewhere around the 10,000th murder. And I realized the Astartes weren't just serving the crusade. They were being destroyed by it. Every compliance action ground away another piece of their humanity, replaced it with pure function. They were becoming what the crusade needed them to be. Weapons that didn't hesitate, didn't question, didn't see faces anymore. The system was perfect. It optimized everything it touched, including the people trapped inside it. Themis haunts me still. The world was beautiful from orbit. All blue oceans and green continents. City lights visible on the night side in geometric patterns that suggested careful planning. Population 900 million. Technology level, advanced. Culture, democratic federation. Threat level, none. They received the compliance ultimatum professionally, requested the standard 72-hour deliberation period. We granted it. Why not? The fleet needed to refuel anyway. We didn't know what they were doing in those 72 hours. They built broadcast arrays, thousands of them, across every continent, every city, every settlement. Simple technology, nothing military, just communications infrastructure deployed with desperate speed. When the deadline arrived, something impossible happened. The entire planetary population gathered in designated areas. Parks, plazas, stadiums, anywhere large groups could assemble. 900 million people, moving with coordinated precision, following instructions broadcast on every channel. We watched from orbit, confused at first, then increasingly horrified as we understood what we were seeing. They sent one final message, broadcast on every Imperial frequency, impossible to ignore. "We have seen what compliance means. We have studied the worlds you've liberated. We have spoken with survivors who've told us the truth behind your unity. We understand what you offer, submission or extinction. We choose neither. We choose to die free." The life sign readings began dropping. Not all at once. In waves, spreading from population center to population center as the broadcast reached them. 900 million people, activating poison capsules simultaneously, choosing death over compliance. The fleet command deck fell silent. I watched the hololithic display, watched the green indicators of life turning red, sector by sector, city by city. A planetary suicide, perfectly coordinated, executed with the same precision they'd probably use to run their society. 6 hours. That's how long it took for an entire civilization to choose extinction. Horus Lupercal stood at the command throne, face unreadable. When the last life signs vanished, someone asked what we should do. "Efficient," he said. His voice was perfectly level. "They saved us ammunition." But I was close enough to see his face, see the muscle at his jaw that wouldn't stop twitching, see his hands gripping the throne's armrests with enough force to leave dents in the metal. He was shaken. Even he hadn't expected this. "Send down documentation teams," he ordered. "I want to know how they organized this. Such coordination might be militarily useful." I went with the first shuttle. The landing site was a plaza that had once been the planetary capital's central gathering space. Now it was a necropolis. Bodies everywhere, arranged in careful formations, some holding hands, some embracing. Families together, friends together, an entire civilization that had chosen to die on their own terms. But the worst part, the part that made me fall to my knees in the ash, was what they'd done with the bodies in the plaza. They'd arranged them into words, letters 50 meters tall, visible from orbit, written in their own corpses. "What have you become?" The question screamed from 900 million dead. Not an accusation, a genuine question. They wanted to know what could transform humanity into something that inspired such fear that an entire world would rather die than submit to it. I couldn't answer. I still can't. But I painted it. Every body, every face, every letter written in the dead. I painted the question they'd asked with their final breath. Later, I heard Horus ordered the site sterilized with orbital fire. Didn't want the image spreading. Didn't want other worlds getting ideas. Too late. I had it recorded, had it painted, had it burned into my memory. What have you become? We were supposed to be heroes. The pieces came together slowly, in fragments recovered from disappeared remembrancers, in overheard conversations, in data streams I wasn't supposed to access. The warrior lodges weren't just social clubs. They were something darker, more deliberate. Spaces where Astartes could voice doubts without seeming weak, where the psychological toll of compliance could be acknowledged. But someone was listening. Someone was guiding those doubts towards specific conclusions. I found references in Keeler's hidden notes to a chaplain who'd been visiting lodge meetings across multiple legions. A word-bearer offering clarity to brothers drowning in the weight of what they'd done. He showed us the truth, one fragment read. Unsigned, recovered from the quarters of a Remembrancer who disappeared 2 weeks ago. The Emperor isn't leading us toward enlightenment. He's leading us toward extinction. We're not building an Imperium. We're building our tomb. Every world we burn, every population we erase, every alternative we destroy, we're eliminating every other possibility for what humanity could be. And when we've killed everything that isn't the Emperor's vision, we'll have created an empire of corpses ruling over ashes. The lodges were where the seeds of heresy were being planted. Not through chaos corruption, not yet. Through truth. Through showing the Astartes what they'd really done, what they'd really become. Rebellion born from disillusionment, from the simple realization that they'd murdered their way across the galaxy for a dream that could never justify its cost. I should have reported this. Should have brought it to command, to the War Master, to someone who could intervene. But I didn't, because part of me agreed with it. Part of me wanted to see what would happen when the truth finally broke through all the beautiful lies we'd constructed. Part of me wanted to watch it all burn. I was in the archive room when I found it. A sealed file marked Primarch Project. Psychological evaluation, 11 to 20. And inside was a single sentence that made my blood freeze. All subjects display sociopathic tendencies consistent with designed purpose. Emotional limiters prevent formation of moral constraints that would interfere with genocidal compliance operations. And below that, in the Emperor's own hand, working as intended. Chapter 4. The Architect's Design. There's a reason the custodians execute anyone who learns the truth about the Primarch project. A reason the Emperor himself burned every file, killed every witness, erased every trace. Because if the Imperium knew what its gods were really designed to do, the whole lie would collapse. And I was holding that truth in my shaking hands. The archive coordinates came from a dead woman. I found her in her quarters 3 days after she'd been reported reassigned. The official story was transferred to another fleet. The reality was a lasgun wound to the back of the head, amateur cleanup, blood still tacky on the floor. Her name was Sindara Vex. I'd met her twice, briefly. Another Remembrancer, another witness growing too curious. In her final moments, she'd scratched coordinates into the metal beneath her desk with something sharp. Just numbers, no context. I almost ignored them. Almost reported the body and moved on. But something in how deliberately she'd carved those numbers, how much effort it must have taken while dying, made me memorize them instead. They led to a subdeck archive that didn't appear on any fleet schematic I could access. The kind of place that existed in gaps between officially documented spaces, maintained through institutional inertia rather than intention. The hatch was sealed with locks that predated current Imperial security protocols. I bypassed them with codes that shouldn't have worked, that were probably older than the Crusade itself. The air inside tasted like time. Cold, stale, undisturbed for decades or longer. Emergency lumens flickered to life as I entered, triggered by motion sensors that somehow still functioned. The light they cast was sickly, yellow, making everything look diseased. Files lined the walls in physical format, actual paper and data slates, not the hololithic archives common throughout the fleet. Some of the documents were written in languages I didn't recognize, in scripts that predated modern Gothic, pre-unification records, maybe older. This was a tomb for information that was supposed to have died. I found the Primarch files in a sealed case, marked with warnings in 6 different languages. All of them are variations on, by order of the Emperor, destruction mandatory. Someone had disobeyed. Someone had hidden these instead. My hands shook as I opened the case. Primarch psychological evaluation. Subject I, Horus. Genetic template optimized for command and inspiration. Social manipulation capabilities exceed design parameters. Critical note, empathy simulation perfect. Genuine empathy absent. The subject demonstrates all external markers of emotional connection, while lacking internal experience of such connection. Classification, charismatic psychopath. Assessment, perfect for inspiring loyalty he cannot feel. Recommended for War Master role. Requires ability to sacrifice subordinates without psychological impediment. I read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. Primarch psychological evaluation. Subject 12, Angron. Empathy centers deliberately stunted during genetic sequencing. Pain response inverted. Experiences pleasure from inflicting suffering, discomfort from peaceful conditions. Designed for sustained warfare requiring brutality without moral hesitation. Note, subject will never achieve psychological equilibrium in peacetime. Perpetual war, essential for stability. Primarch psychological evaluation. Subject 4, Perturabo. Narcissistic personality intentionally amplified. Genius-level intellect paired with pathological need for validation will destroy what he cannot control or replicate. Recommended deployment. Siege warfare and attrition campaigns where collateral damage is acceptable. Warning. Subject will eventually turn on handler if perceived as source of insufficient recognition. Primarch psychological evaluation. Subject 14, Mortarian. Paranoid tendencies and victim complex engineered into psychological baseline. Resentment as primary motivation. Useful for operations requiring sustained hatred of authority and conventional power structures. Will naturally gravitate toward rebellion. Recommended for conflicts where controllable insurgency serves imperial interests. The pattern emerged with horrifying clarity. Each Primarch was broken in specific ways, not flawed, designed, built with psychological fractures that made them perfect for certain kinds of warfare, certain kinds of command, certain kinds of atrocity. The Emperor hadn't wanted balanced generals, hadn't wanted stable, emotionally healthy leaders who might question the necessity of genocide. He'd wanted weapons, weapons that wouldn't hesitate, weapons that would find beauty in bombardment, efficiency in extermination, purpose in perpetual conquest. I kept reading, file after file, watching the pattern repeat. 20 Primarchs, 20 different flavors of weaponized psychology. Some subtle, some blatant, all deliberately engineered. The final document in the case was a summary, written in the Emperor's own hand. I recognized the script from proclamations I'd seen, from orders bearing his personal seal. The Great Crusade requires commanders capable of executing the most comprehensive genocide in galactic history without moral impediment. Traditional military leadership, bound by ethical considerations and emotional attachments, cannot sustain operations of this scale and brutality across multiple centuries. The Primarchs are designed as weapons optimized for specific forms of mass destruction. Their psychological instabilities are not defects but necessary features. A stable, empathetic commander would falter, would question, would eventually refuse. These will not. The galaxy will have one vision or none. Unity is a euphemism for what we are truly undertaking. The elimination of every alternative to Terran authority, every non-compliant human civilization, every Xenos empire, every ideology, culture, or belief system that suggests humanity might organize itself differently than under my rule. This is the greatest genocide in history. It requires weapons without mercy, working as intended. The data slate fell from my hands. Everything was a lie, not just the propaganda we'd been creating, not just the justifications and the rhetoric about bringing civilization to the stars, the foundation. The very DNA of the Crusade's leadership was built on engineered sociopathy and weaponized psychological disorders. The Primarchs weren't tragic heroes corrupted by chaos. They were bombs, designed to explode in specific ways, set to detonate the moment their purpose conflicted with their programming. And we'd followed them, painted them, worshipped them as the pinnacle of human achievement. I don't remember leaving the archive. I found myself in a maintenance corridor, hunched over a waste reclamation unit, vomiting everything in my stomach, and then continuing to retch long after nothing remained. My face was wet. I touched my cheeks, surprised to find tears. I hadn't realized I was crying. Every compliance action I'd documented cycled through my memory, recontextualized by what I'd learned. They weren't mistakes, weren't necessary evils, weren't the tragic cost of a noble dream. They were the plan, the explicit, designed, intentional plan. 6319, where 4 billion people died because they wanted autonomy, planned. Calcinus Majoris, where Perturabo destroyed perfection out of jealousy, working as designed. Femus, where 900 million chose death over compliance, exactly the response the Crusade was engineered to provoke. I was their collaborator, I whispered to the empty corridor. I helped them do this. I made it beautiful. Every painting, every recording, Every piece of art I'd created was a tool of genocide. I'd taken systematic erasure and transformed it into glory, made atrocity into epic, turned the death of diversity into the triumph of unity. I'd been so good at it. The thought of walking to the nearest airlock was appealing in its simplicity. Just open the door, step into the void, let vacuum solve the problem of my complicity. Easy, clean. But something stopped me. Not hope. Hope was dead, had probably never existed in the first place. Not duty. What duty could I possibly owe to this nightmare? Rage. Pure incandescent rage at the Emperor who'd designed this horror, at the Primarchs who'd executed it, at the Imperium that celebrated it, at the bureaucrats who'd optimized it, at the iterators who'd poeticized it, and myself, for believing, for collaborating, for making genocide beautiful. If I was going to die, it wouldn't be as another casualty of the crusade. It would be as a witness, someone who documented the truth and hidden it where it might survive, where someone in the future might find it and understand what we'd really been. But who could I tell? Who would believe me? Who had the power to stop what was already in motion? The answer was no one. The crusade was too vast, too entrenched, too thoroughly justified by its own mythology. And I was just an artist with forbidden knowledge and no allies. But I could record it, could hide the truth in places they wouldn't think to look, could create a testimony that would outlive me. It was a pathetic plan. It would probably fail. It was all I had. The summons came 3 days later. The War Master requests your presence. Immediately. My first thought was that they'd discovered my breach of the archive. My second was that I didn't care. If Horus Lupercal wanted to execute me personally, at least it would be quick. The Lunar Wolf who escorted me said nothing during the walk to the War Master's quarters. His face was expressionless, his movements precise. A weapon, I thought, looking at him with my new understanding. Just another weapon. Horus's quarters were surprisingly austere. I'd expected grandeur, the ostentation that lesser commanders use to reinforce their authority. Instead, functional furniture, minimal decoration, a workspace that looked almost monastic. He stood with his back to me, watching hololithic battle reports, planets burning in miniature, compliance actions reduced to tactical abstractions. He didn't acknowledge my entry, just kept watching the little worlds die. Minutes passed. The silence stretched. My heart hammered against my ribs. Finally, without turning, "Do you think I'm evil, Remembrancer?" The question paralyzed me. Every answer felt like a trap. But I'd already decided I didn't care about survival, only about truth. "I think you're what you were made to be." He turned then, and I saw his face. Not the heroic mask he showed his legion, not the inspirational commander who made soldiers believe dying for him was honor. Just exhaustion. Deep, absolute exhaustion. "You found the files," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Good. I was wondering when one of you would. The archives aren't as secure as my father believes." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. I'm tired of everyone standing at attention around me." I sat, because my legs were shaking too hard to refuse. "My father made me love war more than peace," Horus said, turning back to the hololithic display. "To find beauty in conquest. To feel complete only in battle. I am happiest when I am killing Mara. Not fulfilled. I'm incapable of fulfillment. But the closest thing to contentment I can experience comes from destruction." He touched one of the burning worlds, his finger passing through the projection. "That's not a moral failure. It's my programming. I was designed this way. Given exactly the psychology needed to lead the crusade without hesitation, without mercy, without the inconvenient burden of conscience. You know what you are, I breathed. We all do. Every Primarch understands on some level what we were made for. Some of us simply accept it more readily than others. He smiled, and it was the saddest expression I'd ever seen. 2 centuries of this, Mara. 2 centuries of compliance. Do you know what that word really means? Forcing someone to submit. Exactly. Not negotiation, not an alliance, not even honest conquest. Just breaking people. Breaking entire civilizations until they submit or die. That's all we do. That's all we were made to do. He sat in his command throne, and for a moment he looked almost human. Just a man bearing an impossible weight. I've started to wonder, he said quietly, if my father made us incapable of building anything, because all he wanted was weapons for destroying everything. The other Primarchs have talents beyond warfare. Guilliman can administrate, Dawn can fortify, Vulcan can forge. But me, I can only tear things down. I'm the War Master, the first among equals, and the only thing I'm truly good at is making things stop existing. Someone has to stop this, I said. Stop him. Stop the crusade before. It can't be me. Why not? You're the War Master. If anyone could, because I'm too much like him. Horus looked at me with eyes that held 10,000 years of weariness. When I rebel, and I will, Mara, that's in my design too, built into every Primarch who possesses enough will to question. It won't be to save anyone. It won't be to stop the genocides or free humanity from tyranny. Then why? Because I'll want what he has. Power, authority, the throne. My rebellion won't be righteous. It'll be patricidal ambition wearing the mask of liberation. He laughed, a broken sound. That's the real genius of his design. He made us capable of rebellion, but incapable of building anything better. Even our betrayals serve his purpose. Pruning the weak, stress testing the Imperium, ensuring only the strongest tyranny survives. The horror of what he was describing settled over me like a shroud. The Primarchs weren't just weapons, they were traps. Even their rebellion was designed, another layer of the Emperor's plan. What do you want from me? I asked. Document it, all of it. The truth behind the glory, the horror behind the unity, the design behind the dream. He stood, towering over me. When I fall, and I will fall, either to my father's executioners or to my own inevitable rebellion, someone needs to have recorded why. Someone needs to have shown that we were all prisoners of our own design. He moved toward the door, paused. They'll kill you for this, you know. Eventually they'll find what you're hiding and erase you. I know. Good. At least one of us dies honestly. He opened the door, dismissed me with a gesture. Try to survive long enough to finish the work, Remembrancer. Someone should know what we really were. I made it 3 steps down the corridor before he found me. You spoke with the War Master. Not a question. His voice was smooth, cultured, carrying undertones of false sympathy that made my skin crawl. I turned. Wordbearer, his armor painted in the red and silver of the 17th Legion. His face was handsome in a way that seemed calculated, perfect features arranged for maximum trustworthiness. First Chaplain Erebus, he introduced himself with a slight bow. I've been hoping to speak with you, Mara Vendris. You've seen it too, haven't you? The rot at the Foundation. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. You found the files. You understand what we are, what the Crusade really is, what the Emperor has made us into. He stepped closer, and I resisted the urge to back away. You're angry, betrayed, questioning everything you believed. Good. That's the first step to clarity. Clarity. The Emperor is a god who denies his divinity. What we're building isn't an empire. It's a prison where humanity worships the warden. His eyes gleamed with fanatic intensity. But it doesn't have to be this way. We're going to tear it all down. Start again. Build something without his hypocrisy. For a moment, just a moment, I was tempted. Anything had to be better than this. Any alternative to the systematic horror I'd documented. But then I looked at Erebus's eyes, really looked at them, and saw the same fanaticism, the same absolute certainty, the same willingness to justify any atrocity for the greater purpose, just pointed in a different direction. You'll just build a different nightmare, I said. His smile widened. Perhaps, but at least it'll be honest about what it is. At least we won't pretend our tyranny is enlightenment, our genocide is liberation, our prison is paradise. That doesn't make it better, doesn't it? I think honesty has value, even in horror. But you disagree. I can see it in your face. He stepped back, gave me space. Think about it, Mara. We're going to need witnesses to what comes next. Artists to make people understand why it was necessary. Why the Imperium had to burn before something new could rise from its ashes. I'm not interested in making another genocide beautiful. No. He tilted his head, studying me. Then what will you do? Document the truth no one will believe. Hide testimony that will never be found. Die alone with your useless knowledge. He was offering me purpose, offering me a side in the coming conflict, a reason to survive, a way to make my death mean something. It was everything I'd wanted. And it was exactly the same trap as before, just wearing a different face. I'll find my own path, I said. Erebus smiled like he'd won something. I'm sure you will. But remember, Mara, when it begins, when the War Master falls and rises, and the galaxy tears itself apart, you'll have to choose. Silence or witness, complicity or documentation. He walked away, leaving me in the corridor with the weight of his words pressing down like gravity. Another collaborator with atrocity, offering me the chance to be his artist. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to do anything but stand there understanding that there was no good choice, no righteous path, no way out that didn't end in more blood. I made my decision that night. I would record everything, document the truth, and hide it where someone might find it after we were all dead. Because that's what we were, already dead, whether we knew it or not. The Imperium wasn't going to end the Crusade. The Crusade wasn't going to end itself, and the only way out was through a catastrophe so complete it would shatter the dream forever. And 3 weeks later, on Davin, Horus Lupercal was struck down by a weapon that carried something worse than poison. And when he woke up, the galaxy would begin its real education in what monsters we'd become. Chapter 5. The Witness. The Horus Heresy didn't begin with betrayal. It began with a Primarch's suicide attempt, and the things that whispered to him in his coma showed him exactly one truth, that he was doing precisely what his father designed him to do, and the only way to prove he had free will was to become something even worse. Davin should have been routine. Population, 800,000. Technology, feudal. Threat assessment, minimal. Standard compliance protocols, diplomatic contact, demonstration of Imperial superiority, integration within 72 hours. But Horus Lupercal insisted on leading the ground assault personally. That was the first wrong thing. War Masters didn't participate in minor planetary actions. They had entire legions to handle routine compliances. Their presence was reserved for critical operations, worlds of strategic importance, demonstrations meant to inspire or intimidate. Davin was none of these things. Why is he going down there? I asked Loken, watching the War Master board the Thunderhawk from the observation deck. The lunar wolf's face was troubled. I don't know. He's been different since Ulanor. Distant. Like he's looking for something he can't find. Or running from something he can't escape. Loken didn't answer, but his silence was agreement enough. I watched the Thunderhawk descend toward Davin's surface and felt dread coiling in my stomach like something living. Something was wrong. Not wrong in the way compliances usually were. Not the routine horror of population subjugation. Something else. Something worse. The Vox channels erupted 3 hours later. "The War Master is down. Medical team to surface immediately. The War Master is down." I watched from the command deck as they brought him back. Watched the Thunderhawk dock, its hull scorched and pitted. Watched them carry Horus Lupercal out on a suspensor gurney, his armor rent open by a sword strike across his chest and throat. But that wasn't the part that made my blood freeze. It was how he'd fallen. I'd recorded the engagement through long-range pict capture, reviewed the footage while the apothecaries worked. I watched it frame by frame, looking for what my instincts had screamed. There, at the moment of the strike, Horus didn't try to dodge, didn't raise his guard, didn't move with the superhuman reflexes that made Primarchs nearly unkillable. He stepped into the blade, not stumbled, not caught off guard. A deliberate step forward, meeting the strike that should have been avoidable, taking the wound that should have been preventable. I swear he wanted to be hit. They transported him to the medical bay aboard the Vengeful Spirit. I followed, recorder in hand, documenting what I told myself was history, but knew was something closer to autopsy. The apothecaries worked with desperate precision, but their confusion was palpable. The wound wouldn't respond to treatment, wouldn't close, wouldn't heal despite every intervention they attempted. "It's not the physical damage," one of them said, voice tight with frustration. "There's something else, something in the wound itself. It's changing him. Not killing him. Changing him." Horus lay in the medical cradle, unconscious, but his lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the quarantine glass. I activated my recorder's directional audio, amplified the signal. His voice was a whisper, delirious but precise. "I'm doing what you made me do. I'm doing exactly what you wanted. This is your design, Father. I can't be anything else. You didn't leave me the capacity for anything else." A pause, like he was listening to a response. No, I won't accept that. If this is all I am, if I'm just your weapon, then I'll prove I have a choice. I'll choose my own target. I'll become something you didn't plan for. Another pause. Then with chilling clarity, "I'll become worse than you ever imagined." He was arguing, having a conversation with someone who wasn't there, or something that was there, but invisible to everyone except him. The medical bay's temperature dropped, not gradually, a sudden plunge that made my breath fog. The lights flickered. Equipment began malfunctioning, displays showing impossible readings, temperature gauges registering absolute zero. Then they arrived, word bearers, led by Erebus, wearing an expression of perfectly calculated concern. They swept past the apothecaries with the confidence of men who already knew they'd be obeyed. "We can save him," Erebus announced. "Ancient rituals from Kolkis, techniques that predate the Imperium. The apothecaries have done what they can, but this requires other methods." The head apothecary looked ready to refuse, but Malagurst, Horus's equerry, overruled him. Desperation in his eyes, willing to try anything. Erebus met my gaze across the medical bay, smiled, like we were sharing a secret, like everything was going according to plan. They took Horus deeper into the ship, to sections I'd only glimpsed before during my attempted documentation of the lodge meetings. Places that existed outside the normal architecture, spaces that felt wrong in ways that defeated description. I knew I should stay away, knew following them was suicide. I followed them anyway. The corridors smelled of copper and ozone and something sweet that made my sinuses burn. The walls seemed closer than they should be, pressing in with claustrophobic intensity. Lighting came from sources I couldn't identify. Not lumens, not emergency strips, just ambient glow that seemed to emanate from the air itself. I could hear chanting ahead, words in a language I didn't recognize, but my mind tried to translate anyway, kept supplying meanings I didn't want to know. The door to the lodge chamber stood partially open. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to turn back, to run, to forget what I'd seen and preserve myself through strategic ignorance. I looked through the gap. The chamber was vast, impossible given the ship's internal dimensions. Horus lay on an altar at its center, still unconscious, still whispering his half of that impossible conversation. Word-bearers surrounded him in a circle, their chanting synchronized, harmonic. But something else was there. Not visible, not exactly, but present in the way air displaced around an invisible mass, the way gravity bent around dense objects, the way reality itself seemed to buckle and strain under pressure from something that shouldn't exist in physical space. The presence, multiple presences actually. I could distinguish them somehow, feel their separate attentions like searchlight beams sweeping through my mind. 4 of them, vast beyond comprehension, ancient beyond time, and they were showing Horus things. I could see it. Somehow, impossibly, I could see what they were projecting into his comatose mind. Visions bleeding into reality, manifesting as half-solid images that writhed around the altar. The Emperor at Ulanor, the triumph after the greatest compliance action in history. The War Master presents his father with victory over the Orcs, and the Emperor's response, handing authority not to Horus, but to Malkador the Sigillite, returning to Terra while his son continued bleeding for his dream. Abandonment dressed as delegation. More visions. The genetic laboratories where the Primarchs were created. Documents I recognized. The psychological evaluations I'd found in the archive. Horus watches himself being designed, seeing every flaw deliberately engineered into his psyche, every capacity for cruelty carefully amplified, every possibility of peace systematically removed. Charismatic psychopath, lacks genuine empathy, perfect for inspiring loyalty he cannot feel. His father's assessment, his father's design, his father's intentional creation of a weapon that could never be anything but a weapon. The visions continued, compliance actions cycling past like a morbid slideshow, worlds burning, populations dying, the mathematics of genocide made visible, and behind it all, the Emperor's plan. Use the Primarchs to conquer the galaxy, then eliminate them once their purpose was served. Too dangerous to keep, too powerful to allow it to exist once peace was achieved. Weapons to be discarded after the war. And here was the horror that made my knees weak. The chaos. Gods weren't lying. Every vision, every revelation, every piece of information they were feeding into Horus's mind. It was true, accurate, verifiable. They were corrupting him with truth, using reality as a weapon, showing him exactly what he'd been made for, exactly what awaited him, exactly how thoroughly he'd been used and would eventually be discarded. Evil using truth to destroy tyranny, so it could replace that tyranny with something worse. Horus's eyes opened, not gradually, all at once, snapping from unconsciousness to absolute awareness. He sat up on the altar, the wound across his throat visible but no longer bleeding. Changed somehow, sealed by something that wasn't healing. He looked at Erebus. His eyes held a light that hadn't been there before. Not possession, not yet. Something else. Something chosen. I understand now. Horus said. His voice was his own, but layered with harmonics that hurt to hear. My father made me his weapon, designed me to love war, to feel incomplete without conquest, to find beauty in destruction. He made me incapable of anything else. Erebus smiled. And now you see the truth of his tyranny. So I'll be a weapon, Horus continued, as if Erebus hadn't spoken. But I choose the target. He stood. The presence in the chamber intensified, their attention focused on him with laser precision. I'll burn his Imperium, tear down everything he built, prove that I'm more than his design by becoming something he never intended, something worse than he ever imagined. Not salvation, not liberation, not freedom for humanity from the Emperor's tyranny. Revenge. Pure, absolute revenge. Dressed in the language of rebellion, but motivated by nothing except the need to destroy his creator. The Chaos Gods had shown him the truth, and the truth had broken him in exactly the way they'd planned. I must have made a sound, gasping, sobbing, I don't know, because Horus turned, looked directly at where I crouched behind the door. Our eyes met. He smiled. Document it, Remembrancer. Document all of it. Both sides. Let whoever survives know that there was never a good side in this war. Only different flavors of damnation. I ran. 7 years. 7 years of civil war. 7 years of watching the Imperium tear itself apart. 7 years of documenting both sides of a conflict that had no heroes, no righteous cause, no victory that wouldn't be a tragedy. The Imperium and the Heresy, loyalist and traitor, emperor and war master, all of them monsters, all of them a tyranny, all of them willing to burn the galaxy to prove they were right. And I documented it all. Every battle, every atrocity, every moment where both sides chose to commit the same horrors they accused each other of perpetrating. Hidden copies everywhere, data caches throughout the fleet, files buried in ship systems, physical records sealed in sections no one would think to search. The truth, all of it. What the Crusade had really been, what the Heresy had really become, what neither side would ever admit. And now they were coming for me. The Fidelitas Lex shuddered under weapons fire, not from traitor forces, from Imperial ships. Horus had turned, and anyone who'd been too close to him, who'd seen too much, who knew why he'd fallen. We were being purged. No witnesses to the truth, only propaganda for both sides. I ran through corridors filled with smoke and screaming. Behind me, the methodical footsteps of space marines, not corrupted by chaos, just following orders, just eliminating security threats. My data slates pressed against my chest, 7 years of documentation in physical format. Too much to transmit, too important to leave to systems that could be wiped. The communications room was sealed, reinforced, designed to survive ship destruction long enough to broadcast distress signals. I locked myself inside and heard the Marines' footsteps stop outside the door. They'd breach it. The question was whether I had enough time. I uploaded everything to the ship's black box, the one system that couldn't be remotely wiped, that was designed to survive total destruction, that would keep broadcasting even after the ship was nothing but debris. Set it to transmit continuously, forever, or until someone found it and shut it down. Then I activated my recorder one final time. My name is Mara Vendrus. I was a Remembrancer during the Great Crusade. I believed we were heroes. My voice shook. I steadied it. We were monsters. But the monsters we became had been designed into us from the beginning. The Emperor made his sons incapable of anything but warfare, made them love killing, hate peace, find completion only in conquest, then acted surprised when they turned that capacity for violence against him. The door began to buckle, power tools cutting through reinforced ceramite. The Imperium and the Heresy are both lies. Both sides claim they're fighting for humanity. Both are just different expressions of the same tyranny. The Emperor's secular fascism versus the War Master's revenge fantasy. Neither offers anything except more death. The cutting intensified. I could see the door glowing red. If anyone finds this, and I hope someone does, 10,000 years from now, 100,000, whenever, you need to know. There was never a good side. There was the nightmare we lived in, and the nightmare we escaped to. And both of them were exactly what they were designed to be. The door exploded inward. Concussive force threw me against the far wall. My ribs cracked. The recorder fell from my hands, but kept transmitting. A space marine stepped through the breach. His armor bore Imperial colors, loyalist insignia. He looked at me with eyes that held nothing except professional efficiency. "Target eliminated," he said into his vox, then raised his bolter. "Wait," I started. The recording captured it all. The muzzle flash, the impact, the moment my breathing stopped. Then his voice again. "Purging data systems." Bolter fire, equipment exploding. The systematic destruction of every terminal, every data port, every possible storage system in the communications room. But they didn't find the black box, didn't even know to look for it. And 10,000 years later, it was still broadcasting. Captain Yellen Court watched the recording end, watched Mara Vendrus die on a screen 10 millennia after the fact, heard the Marines purge the data systems, heard the ship die around the black box, heard silence descend. But the transmission continued, had continued for 10,000 years, cycling endlessly, waiting for someone to hear it. "Why is the ship still warm?" her navigator whispered. Court looked at the data readings. The Fidelitas Lex wasn't just preserved, it was caught. Temporal distortion, warp anomaly, reality loop. The ship had died 10,000 years ago, but somehow it was still dying. Over and over. The black box broadcasting its truth into the void, reality itself refusing to let the moment end. "Captain," Drace's voice was strangled. "The body. Look at the body." Court turned, looked at Mara Vendrus's corpse, still clutching the data slate, still frozen in that final moment of terror. Her eyes were open. They hadn't been before, and her lips were moving, forming words without sound, without breath, without life. Court's blood froze as she read those lips. "Turn it off. Don't let it—" "Shut it down!" Court screamed. "Cut the transmission. Wipe our systems. Get that recording out of—" Too late. The data had been uploaded. While they'd been listening, transfixed, it had copied itself into their ship's systems, into their cogitators, into their personal data slates and recording devices, and into their minds. Court felt it spreading, understanding blooming like poison in her thoughts. The truth about the Crusade, about the Imperium, about what humanity had been designed to become. Not just facts, not just information. Contamination. Truth as a mimetic weapon. Knowledge that couldn't be unknown, that rewrote how you saw everything, that made complicity impossible because you finally understood what you were complicit in. She looked around the communications room, saw her crew experiencing the same thing. The same horrified understanding spreads across their faces. "We're still doing it," she whispered. "The Imperium still follow the same design. The Crusades never stopped. We're still burning worlds, still forcing compliance, still serving the exact same nightmare that Mara died documenting. She looked at the recording device she'd used to document their salvage operation. Looked at her crew, all of them recording, all of them with evidence now. Someone needs to know, Court said. Someone needs to see this. Her second officer reached for her weapon. Captain, we should destroy this. Report it to the Inquisition. This kind of knowledge is exactly what they'd suppress, is exactly what needs to survive. Court made her decision. Copy everything. Hide it. Scatter it. Make sure it spreads. That's heresy. No, that's history. She turned to the camera, knowing some future historian would watch this too. Would have to decide whether to listen, whether to spread it, whether to let the truth survive. The lie must survive, she said to that future watcher, or the truth will kill us all. Choose. The screen went black. The archive chamber overlooked the Plaza of Heroes on Macraga, and historiator Kellyan Vex held a data slate marked with inquisitorial seals and warnings in 6 languages. Inside, Mara Vendris's complete testimony. Everything she'd documented. Everything she'd died to preserve. A subordinate had found it, brought it to Vex for evaluation, for decision on whether it should be catalogued or destroyed. Vex had listened to the first 30 seconds, then stopped, hands shaking. Some truths were too dangerous. Some histories should stay buried. The Imperium survived on mythology, on the lie that the Emperor's vision was always righteous, that the Crusades were always necessary, that there was no alternative to eternal war. If people knew the truth, that it was designed this way, that there never was a noble purpose, that they'd been trapped in a nightmare since before the Imperium's birth, what would happen? Collapse. Chaos. The lie was holding reality together. Vex sealed the data slate, locked it in a vault that would remain closed for another 1,000 years, or 10,000, or forever. Outside, the Imperium continued. The Crusades never ended. The killing never stopped, because it was working as intended, and the truth couldn't be allowed to interfere.